Hi, my name's Julian Coman. I'm a leader writer with The Guardian, and I'm delighted to have been asked by the Catholic Centre for Social Thought and Practice to come here today to talk a little bit about Catholicism and politics. I think that we're in an extremely interesting moment when it comes to reading the signs of the times. Number one, I would say, is the environment. We know through Laudato Si the priority that Pope Francis places on the environment, but it's also come to occupy centre stage in the politics not only of Britain but of the world. And I think that Pope Francis's emphasis on that theme can frame a lot of our thinking about the decisions we make in relation to that. A second theme that's strongly emerged over the past year or so in our politics is redressing the balance, if you like, at the workplace between the power of employers, the power of companies, and their employees. These are measures, I think, which speak to or can be thought of in a Catholic context in relation to Rerum Novarum, the great social encyclical of 1891, in which Pope Leo attempted to strike a balance, really, between the rights of employers, the rights of workers, the relations between them. Pope Leo was trying to strike a balance between those two forces through Rerum Novarum. The third area is devolution. Now, there's a Catholic idea which has had wide currency. Indeed, it's been adopted, at least technically speaking, by the European Union. It's the idea of subsidiarity. And that's the idea that you devolve downwards power and agency to the lowest possible level. Now, over the course of decades, Britain has become one of the most centralised polities in Western Europe. It's a top-down politics in which power has been located very much in Westminster and very much in London. But we see big shifts in our contemporary politics now. The rise of the mayoral authorities. They are at the vanguard, really, of a new way of doing politics, which is emerging tentatively over the past 6 or 7 years, but to which both parties now appear to be committed, this funneling outwards and downwards and towards the regions of power, away from London and Westminster. That captures ideas which are very important to a Catholic conception of politics, which is about empowerment and the common good and negotiation between different actors, just as between capital and labour, between the regions in this instance. So here again, we've got a direction in our politics which is interestingly Catholic, one might say. Migration, not just in Britain, has become one of the defining themes of our times. There are big questions here for Catholics. They're questions which relate to a Catholic idea of hospitality towards the stranger. What does that mean? What does that mean in the context of our contemporary politics, which really is seeking to ignore that obligation in the case of large numbers of people who are deemed irregular migrants? How do Catholics react to that? What proposals do they have? Fifthly, I think it's extremely likely that in the next few years we're going to see a major debate on the theme of assisted dying. There is a deep-set tendency, and it's not one which I would condemn wholesale, but it's an emphasis in the way that we think about matters such as this, which tends to emphasize individual autonomy. So those in favor of assisted dying will argue that we each have a right to, in extremis, in very difficult circumstances, in the case of terminally ill people who are in pain, those people should have the right to determine the outcome or to time the outcome of the inevitable. The counter-argument to that is that while individual autonomy is a value, we cannot forget that we are social beings and that what we do influences others, that to establish a law of this kind would set a precedent that would then influence people in the future, influence their decisions. At what point might a choice become a duty, a feeling that given surrounding circumstances, given the quality of life of a terminally ill person, would it not be the duty of that person to give up that life in order to perhaps release capital to family members, relatives who were badly in need of the kind of money that might be able to buy a home, for example? Weighing up these kinds of decisions is clearly enormously difficult, but the Catholic conception of a person as embedded in a network of interdependence and relationships is one that I think can be a helpful one in informing the debate. In Britain and across the West, there is a new emphasis on the need for greater defence spending, for a robust focus on security, on the need to stand firm against threats that are emerging from authoritarian states. The backdrop to all this, of course, is the invasion of Ukraine by Russia and the threat to global security represented by Vladimir Putin. Also in the background, there is the rise of China, the geopolitical rivalry between China and America. Events in the Middle East are further drawing dividing lines between different parts of the world. In that context, how should Catholics think about a pre-war world? Catholic social teaching and Catholic thinking obviously emphasizes the role of the Christian as peacemaker. What does it mean to be a peacemaker in this much more threatening world? Catholicism, or Catholic social teaching rather, has as its primary orientation, let us say, we can say, the idea of the common good. The common good as achieved through a negotiation of plural interests, competing interests sometimes, interests of groups, competing interests of individuals. And if we think back through the issues which I've talked about, that's exactly what's going on there, or should be going on there. So, for example, at the workplace, we have the need for a renegotiation, a thinking through of the relationship between employers and employees, the rights of shareholders versus the rights of local communities. In terms of devolution, we have a negotiation between the centralised power of Westminster, the power of the state, and the power of the regions, and the power of locally elected mayors, but also through the idea of subsidiarity, the key insight that the more power is directed downwards and outwards, the more agency is built up from the bottom, and the more, through that, a sense of empowerment and self-esteem in communities which may have felt left behind grows. On migration, we have the need to mediate between local interests and the idea of what hospitality we extend to the stranger. So striking a balance, negotiating between different interests, a kind of recognition of the pluralism which is irreducible in our politics and society, and the need to negotiate through those plural interests an idea of the common good. It seems to me that that task defines a lot of our politics right now, which makes it a very interesting time to be Catholic, and a very interesting time to be a Catholic who's interested in politics. CST, above all, focuses on the common good. Now, that is not at all about attempting to politically introduce heaven on earth. In fact, it's rather the opposite. It's not about creating the perfect society, it's about negotiating between plural different interests which will not be resolved in some kind of perfect arrangement. But politics is the negotiation, the compromise, the balancing between those interests in order to achieve a version of the common good. So that's what it's all about, which when one thinks of the extremely polarised rhetoric of our contemporary politics, influenced of course by social media, and seemingly becoming ever more extreme, what CST can give with the notion of the common good is the idea of a different kind of politics, one which emphasises ideas of mediating between difference, of compromise, of balance between interests. And that's a valuable and a different vision, I would suggest, to much of what we understand and much of the way we practice politics right now.